So we've got over 300 people that have joined us tonight, and so we're really, really grateful for that. Thank you very much to everybody who's been supporting us and buying cases of wine, and we hope that we've helped you get through these difficult times over the last few weeks. The idea tonight is to keep it fairly general, so we thought that we'd just do a fairly short session. I didn't know whether I was going to be talking to one man and his dog or the entire nation. I think I'm the warm-up for the Queen tonight, but I haven't quite got the audience. So I'm going to try and stick fairly closely to time. So we're tasting 3 wines tonight. We're tasting the Classic Cuvée, and then we're tasting the Bacchus, and finishing off with the Rosé. And I'm going to try and do them at 10-minute intervals. We're going to start the first one at 7:05, and then we'll have one every 10 minutes, and then we'll stick to our half-hour schedule, and then you can all go and eat your food or go to a dance or whatever you're going to do tonight. I've had quite a few questions coming in. Excuse me a minute whilst I just let a few more people join us. They're all in. Good evening, those that have just joined. So yes, so let's crack straight on. You must be thirsty. So the point of telling you it's going to be every 10 minutes is so that we can you can judge how much to pour into your room, into your glass, and you can. If you're a quick drinker, you might want a couple of glasses of the same wine. If you're a slow one, then only pour a little bit. So first wine is our Classic Cuvée, which is going to be handed to me, I think. Or it's there. Oh, it's here. I can reach. So our Classic Cuvée.
Oh, won't do sound.
Some things to notice maybe. A lot of you will know the Vineyard. Cut the top of my head off. There we go. Is that a bit better? Oh, that's too much. There we go. So yes, our Classic Cuvée. This is a non-vintage wine, which means that it's made from a few different vintages. This will be mostly 2016 with some 2017 in. We age it on its lees for about 18 months. And it's done by the traditional method. We're not allowed to call it champagne, but it is the traditional sparkling method. Lots of different methods for sparkling. I'll tell you about those in a minute, but if you haven't already popped the cork, now's the time to do so. I should have prepared one earlier, shouldn't I? That's a good sound. So I've got 2 glasses here, not because I'm greedy, although some people say I am, but I've got one glass that I've washed in detergent and one glass that I've just washed in hot water and left to drain. And I wanted just to see if that was if it showed any difference. So I don't know which glass is which.
Walla walla walla.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I know the one on your right.
This one's probably got slightly more bubbles. The point I was trying to demonstrate, done that well, is that the way that you look after your glass with sparkling wine is very, very important. And the idea is not to wash them in detergents, not to put them in the dishwasher, and not to wipe them with tea towels, because it makes them too smooth. The bubbles need something to nucleate on. So actually using a little scourer in the bottom of the glass can be a very good idea as well. So a few more people joining. There we go. So let's have a taste. So sparkling wines it's a little bit different to still wines because it's giving off CO2. The whole idea of traditional sparkling wine is it's a second fermentation in the bottle. The bubbles are all CO2. So if you stick your nose in it too far, you get a waft of CO2 and nothing else. So we tend to just look at sparkling wine, look at the color, nice golden color, and we're looking for the bubbles to see how big they are. The finer the bubbles, the finer the wine in general terms. And there's different ways of getting bubbles into your wine. Prosecco is a different method. They put bubbles into the tank and then transfer it from the tank into the bottle. With the traditional method, the champagne method, it's actually a fermentation in the bottle, and then we get rid of the yeast and then put a cork in the top. And so the bubbles are produced in the bottle. The CO2 is produced from a fermentation in the bottle. So I've got a question for you. Who was the first person, or who invented is probably too strong a word, but who discovered traditional sparkling wine method? I'll tell you the answer in a few minutes. Let's have a drink first. Cheers, and thank you very much for joining us.
Chris Merritt.
Don't
So with our sparkling wine, we've gone down the route of trying to preserve a little bit of fruit character. So although it's done by the traditional method, it's not actually a real champagne-y character. It's got a little bit more fruit character to it, and that's done on purpose. I think that most people prefer a little bit of fruit character in their wine, and so it's really a feature of all of Three Quires wines. We don't age it on the lees for too long. We want to get that nice balance between a little bit of yeast autolysis and the fruit character. The varieties that we use, I know there's a lot of questions being asked beforehand, so I'll try and answer them all. I have got them all written down, but I'm conscious if I read too much, I'm not going to get through things very well. So one of the questions was, what varieties do we use in this wine? We're great fans of Cuvée Blanc as a base. It's a variety that grows very well in this country. It's quite neutral in flavour, which is very good for sparkling and has good acidity. And we blend that with a little bit of Reichensteiner, Pinot Noir, and I'm starting to use a little bit more Phoenix now, which is actually a cross between Cuvée Blanc and Bacchus, which we'll be trying next, because I actually like a little bit of the aromatic and fruit character in the wine. So cheers again, and I'll give you a couple of minutes just to have a drink of it and enjoy it, and I'll come back and start talking again in a minute or two. Okay, that was probably a quick minute, but conscious that time's going. When we first started thinking about doing this, we thought, oh, well, we could do, somebody suggested that I did an hour. And I thought that listening to me for an hour must be a bit of an ordeal. So surely a quick half hour would be long enough. And then I realized actually when the questions started to come in that actually there is a huge amount to talk about, and I could talk for a lot longer than half an hour, but I'm in danger of boring a lot of people. So what we're trying to do is, if this is successful and you like what we've done, let us know, and we'll try and arrange another one. We'll do a few different wines, and we don't have to finish bang on 7:30 anyway. As long as people are participating and in here, I'm quite happy to carry on answering a few of the questions and talking away. But the answer to the question that I asked was, and I know I did hear somebody shout it out, Christopher Merritt. And he was actually born in Winchcombe in the 1600s. And from, so not just from England, but from Gloucestershire. And he's the first person about 20 years before Dom Perignon to actually document sparkling wine through the traditional method in a bottle. Now, they had lots of problems then because the bottles kept bursting, because they didn't have the technology to make big, thick, strong bottles. And it was only in later years when that facility came along that the champagne movement really got going. So there you are, sparkling wine invented by an Englishman from Gloucestershire. We have a couple of people just joining us. There we go. Right.
Oh, the French miners disagree. Yeah. What? Yeah.
Right. So, time is going on quite quickly, so I'm going to keep moving. We're going to, one of the things I should have said when we started was, don't panic if you don't want to keep up. If you don't want to listen to me now, you've got other things going on. This is being recorded, and I think you will get a link eventually, which will allow you to watch it and taste alongside again, if you like. But the other option is, of course, to have 2 glasses by your side, so that we can line them up and go back and visit the previous one if we want to, or you could just tip it away, of course, and make room for the next one, which I'm going to pour now. And we're going to taste Bacchus. This is 2017 vintage. So I've been asked quite a lot of questions about the difference in vintages, how we get consistency. And the truthful answer is that we are very much in the hands of the weather, and we are a marginal climate. And we've learnt over the years that it's very important to make the right wine in the right year. So 2017 was a year which had very good acidities and nice sugar balance. And so we made a Bacchus. And we make Bacchus most years because we've learnt how to grow it. And there was a question about how we grow, whether our growing techniques have changed over the last few years. And they have to a certain extent. There's more and more effort going into growing things naturally. We're trying to control our yields to actually keep yields low, which allows us to get maximum quality. So the less grapes you have to ripen, the easier it is in a cool climate to ripen them. So we're producing slightly lower yields than we used to 20 years ago in order to try and get that better quality. And running alongside that, of course, there's the subject of global warming and the fact that temperatures are getting slightly warmer, so we can get slightly riper grapes at harvest time as well. So cheers for the second time. Just checking to make sure everybody's in. Are we all okay, Elaine? Nobody waiting? Jolly good. So Bacchus. Bacchus is a great variety. It's becoming known as the English still wine grape. And as I said just now, we crop it at quite a low level. We crop it at a lower level in England than they do in Germany. And I think that's why we get a little bit more of the aromatic qualities. Bacchus changes as it ages. There was another question that was asking about the differences between vintages, and there is a marked difference, especially with Bacchus when it's very young, compared to when it's had a year or two in bottle. It does settle down, and it does get a little bit more weight to it as it ages, but you lose a little bit of the wonderful nettles and elderflower characteristics that you get from Bacchus when it's young. So we sort of we like it with a couple of years age on it to give it that bit of complexity. And the important thing with English wines is that we have very good acidity. So we've got good, crisp, fresh characters, and we back that up with the fruit by limiting the crop and benefiting from a cool climate where the flavors stay in the grape because the temperatures are nice and cool. So we get a very, very long growing season. The sun sets very late compared to a lot of the other parts of the world. And so although we get lower temperatures, we actually get longer day lengths, which do help, especially in the autumn, to ripen grapes very nicely. Cheers again. I did it without thinking, so I better explain why. When I drink wine, I automatically seem to slurp it a bit. And the whole idea is that you take wine into the mouth, and you actually spread it around the whole of the mouth, because you actually you actually taste different parts of the wine in different parts of your mouth. You get tannins and those sort of flavors, the phenolics on the lips. You get sweetness on the tongue, and then at the back of the mouth and in the jowls, you pick up the acidity. So the more you get the air into it and you spread it around your mouth, the more of those flavors you'll get. And I love Bacchus. I think it's got a really good balance of acidity and crispness and freshness, and at the same time, it's got that little bit of weight when it's had a year or two on it. So it's one of my favorite wines. One of the questions I did get asked was about Archer Bacchus, which a couple of people have seen. And this is a Bacchus that's produced here that goes into a bag-in-box. It's not marketed by us. We do it for a customer who's bringing in some very, very fine wines in bag-in-box, and they wanted to have an English wine and to have a Bacchus, and so they blended up a tank of Bacchus here. So it's a different blend to this. It's 2019, so it's much, much younger, and it's meant for fairly immediate drinking. So it's made in a slightly different way and a little bit more upfront. So I have to say that I prefer it in bottle myself, and I prefer it with just that little bit of age on it. We have another person coming, so let me just let them in. I think they're in. What else can I tell you? So yes, as people are asking about comparisons with other countries around the world, it's very difficult because the sort of one answer is, well, we're English, so why do we need to compare ourselves with other parts of the world? On the other hand, it's quite understandable that people want to compare with more established wine growing regions, I suppose. So most people, when they've asked questions, have mentioned France, and the French produce a huge range of wines in different regions. So if we were having to compare English wines with an area in France, we'd be looking at more around the north, Sancerre possibly, but I would probably go a little bit more to the east and actually hit Alsace, and go further across into Germany and Switzerland, and say that you get slightly more fruit-driven wines over there. Alsatian wines are much heavier than English wines, much bigger alcohol levels because they have a warmer climate. But they do get the fruit character similar to the sort of fruit characters that we can produce over here. Another one arriving. So where should we go from there? We were talking a little bit about England and the cool climate and acidities. People were asking about the consistency from year to year. I did mention that we try and make the right wines in the right year. One of the reasons that we blend our wines is to get that consistency. So our mid-range of wines would be wines like Coleridge Hill, Ravens Hill, Willowbrook. They're all blends. So we're creating a style using different varieties, but we're able to use the blends in order to create a degree of consistency. When you get to the single varieties like Bacchus, we're almost welcoming a difference from vintage to vintage. That's what makes wine interesting. A certain vintage is interesting and very different to the following vintage. And if it's good enough but different, we'll make it. But if it's a little bit substandard, then we'll decide not to make the single variety and it will go in to help one of the blends. So it's very much a play it season by season. With acidity, where we're talking about cool climates, one of the very important things to understand is that when a grape ripens, the sugar levels go up as the grape ripens, and the acidities come down. But there's two main acids in a grape. There's malic acid, which is the grape you find in apples, and there's tartaric acid, which is more associated with wines. And you get very, very different characteristics from those two acids. And malic acid dominates in a grape that's not ripe. And then as the grape ripens, tartaric acid becomes more dominant. Tartaric acid, we start using terms when we're describing the wines as crisp and fresh, whereas malic acid tends to be a little bit harsher, a little bit of greenness and a little bit of almost bitterness at times. And actually a grape that's less ripe is far better for sparkling wine. So this is one of the reasons why England is fast becoming known as one of the leading sparkling wine producers in the world, because we've got this wonderful cool climate and we can produce wines with these good acidities. So there you have Bacchus. I'm very sorry, I feel like I'm talking at about 100 miles an hour, but maybe we should have done 3/4 of an hour instead of half an hour, but maybe we'll learn from next time. And as I said at the beginning, we'd really appreciate any feedback, any things that you'd like us to consider doing. I'm very happy to do these if people are interested in it. It's something we thought about when we first were struck with the lockdown, and I was a bit nervous because it's a very different thing to do. I'm very used to showing people around the vineyard and talking to them, but actually when you can see people, you can get some feedback. You can see whether they're interested and actually alter your pace in order to try and make it more acceptable for people. So I really am flying blind here, and as I say, I hope I'm not waffling and just going too fast for you all. It is 25 past though, so we really ought to be doing the rosé. So rosé time. If I can reach it. So our rosé, I should say a bit about the label here. I'm assuming, probably wrongly, that all of you have been to see us at Three Quires at some stage, but it might be that you haven't. And if you haven't, then we'd love to see you. So please do, once we're able to open, do come and see us. We do tours, and we've got hotel rooms and a restaurant, and you can taste wines here and spend all day looking around. It's not a bad place to be. And we're hoping when things start to get back to normal that we might be given the chance to open earlier than some. We've got a lot of space here, and we feel that we can probably operate with a degree of social distancing. So watch this space. We'll certainly let you know as soon as we're able to open. So yes, the label I was going to tell you about. The label was designed a couple of years ago now, and has come onto our 2018 and 19 wines. And it's a drawing of the vineyard. Each label, I'll show you the Bacchus as well, has a different drawing on it, but painting, sorry. On the back label, you've got the whole picture. So each front label is a section of that picture. So if you buy the whole range, then you'll get the whole picture. How's that for marketing? So The Bacchus was 2017, so we're going to jump a vintage now. In fact, we're going to jump two because we're now on to Rosé 2019. We spend more time in the winery arguing over colour than anything else with rosé. People are very passionate about how a rosé should look. Certainly in modern times, rosé has become lighter and paler. I think that's been driven a certain amount by Pinot Grigio and blushes and things, but I think it also conveys the fact that it's lighter and fresher, which is the style of wines that we're really wanting to be drinking these days. So we try and make enough rosé to last us the year and then keep the vintage very fresh so that the following year we'll be launching the new vintage. So we like to really keep rosé at a current vintage. We also argue a little bit over how dry or sweet we should make rosé, and there's certainly been a move towards some slightly more drier rosés. Provence rosé has become very, very popular. But I think it's become more popular to talk about than it has actually in sales. And I think people do still like a degree of residual sugar in the wine. It's still a dry wine, this rosé, because it's young, it's fresh, it's got the fruit character. And you can tell it's a little bit lighter than the 18 vintage. 18 was a very ripe year, if you remember. And so this is a little bit lighter and fresher, but I think it's a very attractive summer drink. And the weather that we've had in the last month or so has been ideal for launching the rosé. And I think it's probably just about the most popular wine that we've been putting into the mail order boxes in the last month or so. So a very light, pale colour. We make it by blending a white variety and a red variety. It's about 80% white wine, using Phoenix and Madeleine Angevine are the two varieties that go into it. And then the red variety that we add is, we had two. We had Rondo and Regent, which are actually the two reds, the two red varieties we use in our red wine. So I'll tell you a little bit about our red wine in a minute, because there's been a couple of questions about that as well. But cheers for the third time, our 2019 rosé. I was asked in one of the questions that was sent through about temperature and what temperature we should be drinking our wines at. And it's a difficult one to answer. Somebody actually asked a very sensible question and said, should we taste wines at a different temperature to if we were just drinking wines? And actually we do that a little bit in our winery when we're tasting wines. If you over chill a wine, then you actually kill off an awful lot of the flavor. So you'll kill off some of the good things, but you'll also kill off some of the unbalanced things, some of the bad things. So when we're tasting wines, we tend not to over chill them. But when you're actually drinking a wine for pleasure, you like a little bit of freshness, and it's quite good to have a degree of coolness to it. But generally speaking, we over chill our wines in this country. We use fridges, and fridges can take your wine down to I don't know, down to 4 degrees or so, and it's far too cold if you're wanting to get the best out of wine. So if you've got a wine you don't like, you bought a cheap wine and it's really not tasting very good, then chill it and it'll taste a lot better. But if you want to get the full flavour out of the wine, then probably 10-12 degrees is about the right for temperature. Storing wine. We store our wines. We've got air-conditioned, temperature-controlled warehouses. We tend to store them at about 12 degrees. The most important thing with wines is that you don't allow them to fluctuate in temperature a lot. In the old days, we had cellars, and they used to keep wine at a very, very consistent temperature. And that's really what wines like. They don't like this variation. So I haven't really told you a lot about the rosé in terms of how it tastes. So the whole idea is to try and get the fresh fruit character. So we bottle our wines quite cold, so there might be a little bit of pétillance on it. That's a little bit of dissolved CO2, but I quite like that. And that's quite nice because we can keep that in the bottle a lot longer by using screw caps. we could do a whole session on talking about corks and screw caps, so don't get me started on that one now. I do like screw caps for our style of wine. They are they're right for us to keep the freshness, and most of our wines are meant to be drunk young. So I said that it's off dry. It's got sort of subtle sort of berry fruit. There's a little bit of raspberry in there, and maybe a little bit of strawberry, and but it's got that crispness, that acidity I was talking about earlier. It's very, very important, I think, in an English wine, that acidity, the freshness and the crispness just balanced with a little bit of residual sugar. So I'm very pleased with this, and it's, as I say, it's one that's moving out of the warehouse quite quickly at the moment, which I like to see for rosé. Some people have asked about what foods we might put with our wines. It's a very difficult question to answer, really, because people have much more freedom now in terms of what you drink with which food. Really, you drink what you like, and if you say it goes, then it goes. Generally speaking, bigger, heavier red wines you associate with red meats and slightly stronger dishes. So I would say that generally our wines are very good with fish dishes, with light salads and asparagus. Bacchus with asparagus is really, really good. But really, drink it whenever you feel like it, which we hope is quite often. Elaine's just held up a. I have got some help behind me. You wouldn't expect me to do this all on my own. Elaine's behind the camera, and she's helping me, let me know when people are arriving, and also giving me a few pointers when I miss things out or do things wrong. So I'm very grateful to her for helping me out tonight. It is actually way gone 7:30, so I'm not sure if any of you have left yet, or if I should say if any of you still remain. But I think there's a couple of questions that I know I haven't answered. One was a very complicated one about growing and about the harvest, and people were asking whether our harvest is later than it is in the rest of Europe. To a certain extent, it is, but actually there are great varieties we grow here that ripen very, very early. We've got very short growing season for a variety called sea grape, for example, and we actually started harvesting that in August in 2018. So there are so many different influences going on. There's plant technology where new varieties are coming along, new clones, new rootstocks that actually enable you to do different things in the vineyard than you could 20 years ago. We've got global warming going on and slightly different seasonal variations. So it's a very interesting time, and I think there's a lot of development still to come in the English wine industry, and we'll keep doing everything that we can to be at the forefront of it. And as I said at the beginning, we're very grateful to everybody that's joined me tonight and that's been buying our wine. We hope you continue to do so. If you've enjoyed this session, then I'd be delighted to do another one. Let us know what you'd like to see. We've got lots of different wines. We could possibly show you some of the wines that we don't normally have on our website. We've got 2 sparkling wines. We've got a Blanc de Blanc and a Blanc de Noir. I mentioned Pinot Noir. Oh, I didn't talk properly about the reds, which somebody had asked about. We've only got 1 red wine on the website at the moment, our Ravens Hill, and that's a blend of Regent and Rondo. But we do produce a Pinot Noir as well. It's a little bit lighter, and so maybe we could do something that where we maybe taste through those. So yeah, be delighted for a bit of feedback. Has this been too long, too short? Have I spoken too much? Did you need more gaps? But as a starter, I think I'm still here. So and I think there's still a few people listening. So it hasn't been hasn't gone as badly as it could, and hopefully it's gone as well as you'd hoped. And I think we'll just have one final cheers. Here's to the end of the lockdown coming soon, and the new normal, and VE Day. Cheers to all of those as well, and thank you very much, and goodbye.